Good day, everybody, and thank you so much for always tuning in every Tuesday on LinkedIn Live at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have you ever wondered why women of color or diverse backgrounds get to be chosen as tokens? A recent panel at the Wondery explored the effects of tokenism in the workplace and how businesses and employees can address it. Let's kick it off by defining tokenism. It's the practice of doing something, such as hiring a person who belongs to a minority group only to prevent criticism and give the appearance that people are being treated fairly. You might also be wondering what this has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. This illustrates how very few people are like you in the organization. And in one regard, it could have been that you were hired as a token, or they were interested in diversifying their efforts, but not being made fruitful. My name is Rochelle Carrier, and I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion advocate. And for a living, I help thought provoking leaders implement DEI plans in their workplace. If you tune in, not only will you experience self reflection, you'll have better insight. In our previous episodes, we shared tokenism. My personal share is when organizations resort to making superficial attempts to include underrepresented groups to tick a box. That's where the problems began. Volita Alman is currently an instructional coordinator at West Georgia Technical College in Noonan, while also being involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion belonging, where she has her certification. She earned her Master of Education degree in secondary education for curriculum and instruction from the University of West Georgia in Carrollton, and is certified as an adult mental health professional. She packs a punch with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Workplace certification from the University of South Florida. She is actively involved within her community while on multiple boards and professional organizations. A highlight of Volita's career was in collaboration with Coweta County Schools as a leadership Coweta alumnus to develop the Launchpad Initiative, career development programming at the elementary school level via Media Center learning portals. Another notable career achievement was in partnership with the Noonan Coweta Chamber of Commerce to develop and launch advancingcoweta.com, a website establishing to support the U.S. Chamber of Equality of Opportunity and Economic Recovery and Resiliency Task Force initiatives to address disparity in education, employment, entrepreneurship, and criminal justice. Volita, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
So today, our question is, what can businesses do about tokenism?
So I am in a position where I am fortunate enough to work for an organization that promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion. In the past, I have not been able to do so. So some of the practices that we currently have in place is in regards to creating a diverse hiring process. When you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's important for the organization to make a decision to have different individuals from different backgrounds as a part of your organization to bring different ideologies in order for the organization to progress and have sustainability as far as progression. And when equity comes into place, a business can make the choice to include those individuals at the table of the decision makers, and also allow them to have a voice at the table of the decision makers. fortunately for me, we have various advisory boards for each of our programs. So that's one way that you can address tokenism in the workplace. Partnering with organizations outside of your organization, as we do. So we partner with nonprofit organizations, business and industries. We also partner with our local chamber of commerce, and we aspects in the relationships between.
Oh, we're having technical difficulties. Volita, your network actually froze. So what I'm going to do, this usually happens. It's okay. Ah, there you are.
Okay.
Yes.
I was like, I'm not sure if you heard what I said. What was
We
the last thing you heard?
so building community partnerships.
Yes, and that's the key to address tokenism. Yes, you have these individuals from diverse backgrounds, but you also need to recognize that those individuals bring a certain talent and skill set and knowledge to your organization that can be useful to help progress that organization. You cannot do it's something that you. Oh, okay, it's a motion sensor thing. So you cannot, yeah. Well, I'm the motion sensor light. So you cannot. It's something that you can't do alone. Yes, tokenism. It would seem that since they have a diverse culture, as far as from various backgrounds. It just depends on perspective. So depends on the perspective of the individual and also the organization. It only becomes tokenism if it's only an intent and it's just, as you said earlier, to check a box. But if you feel as if you are a token, then you could be in a position to maintain that space, or you could be in a position to change that space by making an impact. So since you have been invited to the table, what are you going to do? Don't be the only or the last. Bring someone else along when you are in that position.
Right. So, you know, to have the audience understand exactly, Malika took the words out of my mouth. She said, tokenism is greatly about perspectives. And if a variety of people from diverse backgrounds are at the table, they're all going to come with different perspectives. Do you agree?
Yes.
Right. So I want to introduce, and we'll come back to that. Felicia, thank you so much for coming today. Felicia Ward is a proven marketing communications strategist with over 30 years of extensive acumen in national account acquisition and client services at ad agencies, PR firms, and consulting with C-level executives at Fortune 100 and 500 companies. Felicia, thank you so much for coming. And as you noticed, we were talking about tokenism and what businesses can do about tokenism.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Rachel, for inviting us to the table for such a dynamic conversation. I think these conversations need to be had. And to kind of piggyback on what Belita was talking about, I think what's really critical from the employee perspective, and I've also worked from the vendor perspective, from working at advertising agencies and being the minority hire for a particular account or brand. And I think the most important thing is there's a difference that needs to be made in terms of onboarding versus navigation. When most of the time, when it comes to diversity hires, that people are made to feel very welcome in terms of the onboarding. There are workflows, things go very smoothly, and inside of your 90 days, that's when most people start to actually experience problems, because now now they've met the real company that they're going to be working for. And I think what's helpful is from the HR perspective to make sure that there's a navigation component to help people navigate, not educate people on their jobs. And when I say navigation, I'm speaking specifically about how that particular corporate culture works, how things are done, how the workflows go, what are their actual systems. Because oftentimes when you're a token, or they perceive tokenism and diversity as the same thing, and they're not synonymous. And what ends up happening is the token is always assumed to be the special hire that was probably unqualified for the job, when more than likely they are 10 times more qualified for the position, had to jump through several hoops to prove their worth. And once they get in, what they really are lacking is the need to have the navigational component to find out what the employee, who they are as a person. So that navigation helps employees feel like they belong there. You need to have mentorship and ambassadorship that's actually helping the person navigate and speak in rooms when they're not there, to recommend that person for a particular position, or what your skill set is. It's often limited when it comes to the tokenism. They figure that you're there as a check mark, as you stated. And I think the navigational component and finding out who that person is that you just hired, what are the connections and the relationships that they could help bridge and develop among the current employees that actually work within the organization, things that they might have in common. As a human, are you a mother? Do you like to work out? Just common human commonalities that I think help people feel like they actually belong, as opposed to just being a diversity hire. And I also see that when it comes to tokenism, that one person is representing their race and asked to serve sometimes as a person who's actually there to help figure out what people are saying. I often say to people, listen, I'm in marketing communications, but I'm not an interpreter. And we're often asked to be the interpreter for the corporate company. When, for instance, in advertising, when there's an advertising campaign comes up and they're looking to actually attract, and the demographic is people of color, they assume that you represent all people of color. Therefore, because you're African American, you're supposed to know all about hip hop. You're supposed to be well versed in African American culture and studies. And you might be a person that's on my team that's from Ohio, that grew up on a farm and has no clue to that, but they're very good at their job, and they feel pressured and feel like they're kind of being fancied about the company. So that's just my contribution, is the navigational part. I equate it to going to a party. When you go to a party or you go to any type of event, there's always great onboarding. People are welcome. There are gifts. Everyone's, greeted. Everyone's quite nice. But that's when you're a visitor. But when you come to join a company, you're looking to join a family. And there's a big difference. When you go to join a family, there's responsibilities that everyone must share, and everyone has to also be able to work amongst one another and be able to work well together. You don't have to like everyone, but the level of respect has to be there, and a shared commonality as to who we are as humans while we're there is just important.
Right. So those are great points. And my takeaway is that it's inclusiveness.
Exactly. The inclusiveness helps with the belonging. I think what happened is, in the 60s, there was the minority recruitment, and then there was the diversity hire, and then it was trying to get people in positions of management. So now it's like, okay, now you're diverse. Now we're helping with the equity in terms of having higher pay and managerial responsibilities, but the belonging aspect is missing. If you don't play golf with someone that's on your team that's in a position of power and you've done a great job and it's you versus another person, the person who plays golf with that person is going to more than likely get the job. So there's networking that's going on behind the scenes that has nothing to do with the job. And that's oftentimes how people feel like they don't belong. And they end up shutting down and moving on somewhere where they feel more comfortable and they can be more of their authentic self, as opposed to, acclamation oftentimes leads to suffocation. And when people can't be their authentic selves, it's like we have a commonality and we have a language, but you have to be able to express yourself, and people have to be honest about where real decisions are being made.
Right. Volita, I see you shaking your head. You want to add to that?
Yes, I completely agree that it is important about those relationships that are established behind the scenes. My mother would always tell me, she would encourage me to seek education and get the skills, but she also indicated that it's not what you know, it's who you know. And it's through the networking when you meet these individuals that you find out the commonalities on the personal level, not and stay away from the professional level. That's how you build the relationships. And my current organization, I'm not really experiencing quote unquote tokenism, but I have in the past. And that experience was very emotionally debilitating. I was hired because I was qualified. However, since it was a check the box type situation, I was the only minority, I believe, in my specific department. And they treated me as if I was not knowledgeable and I was not skilled, but I had prior experience. They assigned me a mentor. However, the mentor wasn't as supportive as you would expect a mentor to be. So what I've learned in navigating my professional career is that I don't have to have one mentor. I don't have to wait for someone to assign me a mentor. I can create a mentor circle in different aspects of my professional career. And also I spoke earlier before Felicia had an opportunity to join us that I do participate in nonprofit organizations. And I use those nonprofit organizations and my partnerships with the community to also create allyships, because I may be in education, but there are people that are in business and industry or community leaders who can also serve as an ally within the field of education. That's one thing I like about this community that I not only work in, but I also live in, is that there's a common goal for everyone to be successful and prosperous.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I definitely agree with that. I think building that outside community is really key. I try to network in organizations like this, and I think it's really important to educate ourselves on diversity, equity, inclusion. I advocate for everyone to get a certification in diversity, equity, inclusion so they can understand what the plan is behind the scenes, that there are objectives that companies have to meet, and that I think it's a lot about, it's almost like police and what happened with racism with that. It's the same thing within the workplace. If you don't educate yourself on what your rights are and what's possible for you, and then as you said, to network with other people outside of your job and to network with other African Americans in a variety of fields. I try to network with a lot of African American HR managers, because you need to understand what your rights are when you're on the job as a contractor versus an employee. You need to understand from a legal perspective what that's like. Having worked in crisis management, I always try to educate people about who sits at the table when major decisions have to be made at a corporate company. And we used to call that the trifecta. Now it's a quad. It was always in the room. When crisis breaks out at a company, an emergency meeting is held, and who's asked to come in? The director of HR, general counsel, the communications person, and now compliance. And we basically, compliance says, what did you know and when did you know it? HR says, what rights have you violated? Legal counsel says, what exposure do we have to lawsuits? And communication says, hey, once it becomes a PR nightmare, what's going to happen? What are the optics on that? We give that information to the CEO level and oftentimes the shareholders without the CEO, and decisions are made at that level. So when people have problems, a lot of times I have friends that'll call me and say, such and such happens. Well, I'm going to tell them from the communications perspective what's going to happen. And then I call friends that used to be in general counsel, used to be in, inspector general at a company. You have to know and network with some heavy hitters or people who know the compliance standards for different departments within the company that you work, so you can obtain an objective opinion as to sometimes what you should do next, if anything. And I think that's important, and building that community of knowing someone that you can actually call and get some good advice from, and also to network if you need to get out of that space. If it's a toxic space, you need to
Very
move on.
important.
It's very important to build and establish those relationships.
Right. And that's interesting, because that flows into our second question, which is how should employees respond? You know, there was a situation that I didn't personally encounter, but it was another guest who mentioned that she was the HR director, and obviously a woman of color, an HR director for a top 100 Fortune company. And she suffered all of the above. And she lasted for X amount of years, but because she knew, and you said legal counsel or general counsel, you started off with legal counsel, and that's what triggered the story, and then you went to general counsel. And what she did, because she knew the law, because she worked on the inside, that she was able to file a lawsuit, in which she won.
When you know your rights, people have a completely different way of, they don't handle you. They don't send mentors to babysit. They send mentors to actually see how helpful they can be, because they want your experience to obviously amplify outside of that. It's funny how tokenism can turn into a powerful tool when used correctly in that space. But as she was saying, is that it's really horrible when you're hired as a token and they limit your abilities, and you're you're sitting there to have just a check mark. When I worked at advertising agencies, that would often happen. If you think about the top 100 or the top 10 advertisers in the world, they're never African American. It's always the general market agency, and then there's the diversity advertising agency or PR firm. We get the crumbs of what they get, and then they don't really ask for your creative input or any kind of strategy. It's implementing. What they really want to do is utilize the communities of people of color to get their message out. So by hiring us, we check off a box for them. And that's part of the thing that has to change, and that they're trying to attempt to change within advertising and PR. And again, it's having that knowledge of diversity, equity, inclusion, and knowing your rights, and knowing people that you can make a phone call to someone that's on that golf course. I'll quote Carl Horton. Carl was the CEO of Absolute. And Carl Horton said to me, I was about to go to a networking event, and he said, "You have to go where?" And I said, "I have to go to a networking event." And we had just done this huge dig with Absolute. And he turned to me, and he turned to his friends. We were on the golf course, and I was going to have his limo take us home. And he said, "Guys, what's the name of the networking event you're going to?" And he said to me, "The only people that go to networking events are people that need to network." I'll never forget that. He said, everyone has these long titles, but unless their title is 3 letters, they're not in charge of anything. So I didn't go to that particular networking event, because he said, if you're the Northeast regional whatever, you don't have the authority or the budget necessarily to hire 1 or 2 people. So you're wasting your time talking to the wrong people, when you really should would be networking with people who actually work within the space that can tell you what the space is like, but then finding out from some other companies that are non-competitive to yours that, hey, be friends with someone that's at Macy's in retail that works in general counsel. Be friends with someone, at a toy company and different things. And they'll tell you different situations they had. And they're always a good person to call and bounce ideas if you find yourself in those situations. And then we said about building the community. If you have to step out, which is what I end up doing, stepping out on my own, is that you're able to do so because of the network that you've kind of established. And it's just key here. So Rachel, bravo to you to continue to have talks like this and organizations that want to speak to this topic and educate people of all colors as to what the differences are within the workplace, because everyone's having a different experience. You can talk to 10 people that all work for the same company and you'll get different answers. Right.
It's interesting. You mentioned, and to go back a little bit, because we're covering so much. It's an amazing conversation. Thank you both. The idea of networking. I did a 4-day seminar workshop with Tony Robbins. And I remember he said something really interesting. He had, rented a home on his island somewhere and invited 10, of the highest, paying CEOs in the world. And again, it's exactly what you said. They were all had different titles, but they were not all in the same corporate space. So, somebody was CEO of an electrical company. The other person was, a best-selling author, and different people, completely different. And then he remembers one person said to him, you should, I think it was it cricket? I think it was cricket. It's the funniest story, that you should come and play cricket. He's like, I'm from Australia. Why am I going to play cricket? And the person kept insisting that he go play cricket. You must go play cricket. And eventually he did, for many months later, because, he has a very busy schedule. Many months later, he went to go play cricket. And he met someone that was going to help him in a business a new business that he was founding, that he had founded. Mm-hmm. So he said that person was insistent on him doing something. He didn't even realize that was the person that he was going to work with in the future. So He called it a peer group. It's important to have your peer group. And it's interesting you said networking. I stopped networking a long time ago because I realized as well that the networking was it didn't serve its purpose.
Right.
At the time there were business cards, we're exchanging business cards, we're talking about what we did, but it didn't really serve the global purpose. And when you have your peer group, then you say, okay, I can call this counsel, I can call this lawyer, I can call this African-American accountant, or because now they're a part of your peer group or your network. Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, it is. I think you hit it right on the head. What happens at networking events, people bring their business cards and everyone seems to be networking, but really networking events are transactional. Mm-hmm. You're looking for business or you're looking for work. They're looking for business and they're looking for work. And because everyone's looking to make a transaction, it ends up being a transactional experience. It's not really helpful. And the other thing is it's desperate. People are they're desperate to meet someone that's going to be able to help them down the line. And that transactional experience is it's like being too salesy. It doesn't come across well. But when you meet people within your own peer group, and I'm not saying that to be elitist, to say you only should be talking to VPs or things like that. Wherever you are wherever you're working, if you're a person and you're working at the A&P grocery store, you should be friends with a cashier, but also make sure you're friends with the customer service person and the assistant general manager, and meet a general manager at another grocery store to get a different perspective of how your grocery store is working, that you actually have what you aspire to, and have like a nice cross section of people that you have had all different types of experiences that you can call upon, and that can be really cool.
Right. Right. Yeah. Right. Volida, I was thinking something. It was interesting. Volida, do you think that most people find themselves where you think that they volunteer to be in that token position?
I would say that they don't volunteer to be in that token position. However, it depends on the direction in which they would like to follow their career. The token position could actually be a gateway or opening for them to further their career further. As far as the networking, I would agree that it's transactional, which is why you have to keep in mind your goal. It's important to network not only with those that are in the C-suite, but those who may be in an entry-level position. You never know who that person has the ear of in that specific organizations. I network a lot with the local chamber events. And within this DEI space, I've networked a lot. Previously, I tried to keep my networking within my immediate geographic area. However, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging has allowed me to step outside of my comfort zone. And I'm networking with individuals all across the world. And with that, I'm finding a lot of ideas that I can actually bring back to my organization and also to my community. As I had mentioned to Rochelle in a previous conversation, those ideas, I'll try to implement it within my organization, but because I network outside of my organization, and even though the current position that I have really isn't a leadership type organization, I realize that I'm not limited to, if I want to be in a leadership position, I'm not limited to my organization. I can lead from the outside of my organization, which is one of the title of one of Stacey Abrams' books, Lead from the Outside. There are lots of influential individuals out in the community, in the nonprofit area, in the local chamber, and I would implore individuals to visit their local chamber's website and see what they have available. There's a lot of activities that are actually open to the public, and you can grow your network. You can grow your professional skills that way. That's the avenue that I took. As a matter of fact, you were saying about the networking event, Felicia, and how they were saying that you're not such and such title. Well, I was actually invited a few years ago to an interstate leadership trip, where the chamber had actually invited me to go to a leadership trip out of state and learn things about that community and how they had developed from a small city type community into a metropolitan area. And so there are ways that you can contribute with actually not having the title. There are individuals out there looking for those different perspectives. One thing that I've learned is you start with the data, and you're the token, and they lead you to believe that the whole advisory committee on the perspective of a marginalized individual. But what's most effective that I find in my networking and my research is doing the data, looking at the data, and not just looking at what the data is showing you, finding questions what the data is not showing you.
Right.
And that's the key. So if you are in an organization and you want to find out what the employees are thinking, have an employee survey. Look at the data. See what's not being said. So that's my perspective on that.
Malika, interesting, she said here, she says, being perceived as a token versus an actual value can add the same effects. She also says, I agree with Volita in that part of the work is what LeBrown calls being so good they can't ignore you. Yeah. And she says, again, great point, Felicia. One way to discern whether you were considered a token hire is if you are just dropped in. And Dr. Akko, she was on our show a couple of weeks ago. She says, I love that. Navigate, token or not, POC often have challenges navigating organizations when they are one of few.
Mhm.
She said, and somebody else, Stacy said, I've been in that golf playing situation. And Dr. Aku says, I've experienced the same in my PhD program.
Mm.
Yeah. So it's, it leads me to the next question. It's funny because we touched on it a little bit earlier. And is tokenism diversity without inclusion? Yeah.
Yeah, I would think so. I think it's the diversity without the inclusion part, without the belonging. That's so essential. Like Valita was saying, is that if you've ever been in a position where you're a token, it's a lot different. Sorry, I'm gonna call coming in. It's a lot different than when you are just the sole person on your team, and you're just as qualified as everyone else, and you belong. I've been in those situations as well, where I've worked with a great team, worked in great corporate spaces where I was the only one, but I was made to feel equal. And that's a completely different feeling than feeling alone and limited in the skills that you're able to contribute to the team, because they see you as less than, tolerating. That's what you feel like, you're being babysitted and tolerated versus actually being of value and contributing, to the team. And that part of the team, there's, that inclusion part. And they say there's no I in team. Well, you need the inclusion. And in 2021, we like to see the inclusion and the belonging.
Right. And sometimes you have to, if you can't find an ally in that space, sometimes you have to be your own ally, even though you're marginalized. So there's oftentimes I'm invited to certain meetings, and they'll make the comment, well, does anyone else have any comment? And I'll say, I have something to say, and then I just rattle off whatever thought I have in my head. And I do get that kind of stare, because I guess they're shocked that, yes,
you speak.
I am a marginalized. Right, I speak.
And you actually have something to say.
So that's okay. And I will keep amplifying my voice when I have an opportunity to be invited to the table.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's so key what you said, Belita, about establishing that network outside of the job, because you're oftentimes, that is your support system, that you call on the people outside within your community, within other companies. That's what I tended to do, because I was often the only person in the space. And we even had a situation where I worked for a project, I won't say, it was a very prominent, and there was one of each POC, and literally we refer to somewhat behind the scenes as snacks. I don't know if you've ever heard that term before.
No, what does that mean?
Snacks. There was one person that was an Oreo. I guess that was myself. There was a person who was Asian American. She was the apple. There was someone, they were yellow, and they were the banana, and the bean, they were Mexican. So really what we really figured out really quickly was that we were all token appointed to this particular project. What we did was we just turned it around and said, let's embrace the word snacks and let's move forward. And we turned that project out. It was great because we used the data, we utilized our experiences, we used the wealth of knowledge that we actually had and brought to the table, and created something really beautiful in the project. And it was great. And it was a wonderful experience. And it really could have been a defeating experience had we not all kind of come together and realized what was going on. We would have been privately kind of self-deprecating in our own little worlds. And we realized that, we've been put here, we're part of the team. Why don't we collaborate in and outside of the office and bring flavor from the snacks?
Right. I like that. Bring flavor from the snacks.
And it turned out to be a wonderful experience, and we're all still friends to this day.
So it was a mind shift, from what I gather. It was a mind shift, right? Volita, we're talking about pivoting, and you literally shifted, you pivoted from one perspective of seeing something to another, and it worked.
Yeah. And you think about it, that's what our ancestors did. There always has been a token. There has to be someone that breaks that barrier. until that's done. And it's just the empowerment of that mind shift, that to say, you know what, I'm going to turn lemons into lemonade, and they're going to love it. They're going to love it.
Yeah.
Right. It's funny. That brings us to our next question, which is interesting and exactly what we're going to thread upon. Is tokenism a wall and not a bridge?
Tokenism would be a wall if you are, as someone quoted earlier, dropped in and you stay in that space and you do absolutely nothing with it. But tokenism can in turn be a bridge where you, with the example that Felicia provided, they call them snacks, but they turn that project out. So
Right.
it's you with that tokenism.
Definitely. I think that empowerment of breaking through that barrier and to create a bridge. You have to have people that have come before us. And I've helped personally counsel people who are going through a really bad situation at their job and tell them that, listen, you're halfway across that bridge. You just can't see it, but it's there. And if you can help build that bridge, and let's find out who else can help empower you, who else, what other kind of supports do you need? What kind of help do you need? Because we're not there on the job with you, but we're with you.
Right.
You know?
And it's interesting, Felicia said, empower you. And I find in a lot of situations, the quickest way that people lose their power is thinking that you don't have any. You always have the power. You have the power of choice. You just have to make sure that you are informed about your rights, your rights as for humanity as an individual, your rights legally. And that's a lot of times how this system that's been set up to work against us prevents us from moving forward, because we don't keep ourselves informed. And I believe it was Felicia that mentioned earlier, the person who knows their rights, their legal rights, I feel that's the person that doesn't need validation. And they're a very powerful person that's in the room.
Absolutely. Malika said, she said here, use it as leverage. Speak now or forever hold your peace.
I like that.
Yeah.
Too.
And then Bertine, she says, tokenism can be both a wall and a bridge, as bridges can be crossed and walls can be climbed.
Climb.
Yes.
I like that.
However, when tokenism is a ceiling, that is when there is no leverage and no room to grow or evolve.
I love that. I love that. I love the wall to climb. That's another mind shift.
That's a huge mind shift.
Yeah. It's showing that the process may take a little bit longer, but you'll get there.
Yes.
A lot longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the obstacle might be a little more challenging, but like you said, you can get there.
But isn't it wonderful that we're in a time now where walls can be torn down and ceilings can be broken?
Yes.
Yes. And it's also empowering to see that it's happening on a global perspective, not just within the United States. I think what happened with George Floyd, when people were shocked to see the global support of people of color and allies, that it was astounding to see Amish people holding up signs that they were for George Floyd, or people in other countries. I think that it lends the credibility that the shift is underway, and I think it's a really exciting time. The diversity, equity, inclusion certification that I got from MoMA University, they had 110,000 people globally participate in the actual DEI certification.
I'm one of them. Yeah.
Yes. And you know how powerful it was. So powerful to have that global perspective. It lets everyone see that you're not alone, that people are not wrong in their thoughts, and feeling alone and feeling isolated. I think a lot of that is people are being a lot more cognizant of the fact of who they work with. And I think that people are much more aware, because of the lockdown, that they can work within a peaceful environment. working from home is part of work. That there are all these different ways that people can work, and I think it's a lot more acceptable that people don't want to assimilate to the point of suffocation. People want to assimilate to be part of a team that's going to make an indelible impact, as opposed to losing your identity and losing yourself,
Right.
and having that differentiation as to who we all are as human beings. And I think the collective of that certification kind of warranted that, the news coverage of that. And I think it's a really exciting time to know that we can climb walls.
Yes.
Right. Climb walls and cross bridges. And cross bridges. Oh, ladies, it's been wonderful. So my keynote is that while I tried to limit my own bias as much as possible by interviewing only women whom I did not know and sticking to the same set of questions for ongoing interviews, it was impossible to completely remove my own personal experience from this discussion. Without it, I would have not been able to undertake it in the first place. So the continual theme surfaced that if true equality in the workplace is what we're after, then sooner or later we will have to tackle the issues that are distinctive to us. And especially in the workplace, we need to recognize we're not alone, as we mentioned earlier. I know that many of you are having transparent and courageous conversations and dialogues with the people around you, and you're trying to figure out how you feel about this. Ponder that change starts within us. How you resolve those questions will be distinctive to you as women of color and of diverse backgrounds. This will reflect your personal and professional experiences through your own community and workspaces. What is essential is that you do answer those questions. We uncovered the results of tokenism and how to put it into perspective. What is crucial is that you do go through the process, and while enough of us can just do that, over time, we will continue having a united front. Transparency and authenticity is the key. We need to be true to ourselves, create within us transformation. Take your drawbacks and turn it into valuable situations for others. Give yourselves some grace. Volita, we were talking about grace earlier. I think it was backstage. Give yourselves some grace. We must keep having these courageous conversations about DEI, DEIB. Where will these dialogues take us? We don't know. At least we're here to help. Again, Malika, she has something amazing to say, what I'll share with you. She says, the mindset required that is necessary is that there is a journey ahead. Put hashtag eyes wide open.
Yes.
Do not be concerned about the bridges, the walls, or ceilings. Be concerned with conquering the space you find yourself in. Ah, this is good. Be the version of yourself that you can look up to. Amen. This is what I'm telling my 6-year-old daughter. She needs to be better than the person that she was yesterday.
Yes.
She's not understanding that yet because she thinks that she has to compete with somebody else.
No.
But amen, Malika, for saying that. And she says, be aware of the version that you can look up to. Ah, this is amazing.
I love that. I love that.
I do.
She said, I love this conversation. Somebody else said, thank you so much for the wonderful and timely discussions. And Dr. Aku gets support, a mentor, or a therapist. 100%.
Yes.
The mentor is crucial. So follow me on LinkedIn, share your comments, your feedbacks, your questions, and we cannot wait to hear from you. This has been an epic moment, as next week we will cover tokenism again. Thank you for listening and follow me on LinkedIn. Ladies, it was the utmost honor to have you on the panel today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for inviting. Thank you for having us. And Volita, thank you. So it was nice meeting you. And now we can be friends on LinkedIn.
Yes, most definitely.
Yes, I'd love to participate in some of your events that you're networking. And I hope we all should continue to network. I jot that down every time we meet. and you have guests, I go ahead and make sure I friend the people that you have on your shows and your
course.
programs. Mhm.
Of course. Thank
Yes,
you
we
so
have to
much
build
again,
our
ladies.
community.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.